The Rolex Air-King was for so long the least loved watch from the brand. Some people would say a Rolex is a Rolex, but some would say the Air-King was the consolation option to access the crowned brand. And through peculiar circumstances and connected dots on the universe, I managed to collect 3 Rolexes. I also had the chance to review and experience over 10 models from different lines and materials. In time, I created myself a fixed idea of how a Rolex design should look. Because as an artist, a son and a brother of a sculpture, natively I have the capacity to retain, record and remember shapes and volumes. I thought I knew the design language and the proportions of Rolex. But this Air-King surprised me quite a lot, as I've never seen such proportions put together in a single watch. So I was surprised by the volumes of this pilot watch, because I had strong hopes on this 40mm platform. I thought it would be the mother of all balances in watchmaking, but apparently the brand feels like looking at optimizing the machining costs, diminishing the tailoring of their designs. And I understand that a watchmaker, besides making watches, needs to make business as well. And I can cope with that, looking at other brands with less success in numbers. But in my view, the globalization of proportions is wrong. When you thrive to be the best, when you increase your prices from one year to another, and when you are the most sold brand on the watchmaking industry, you just don't ruin your designs. There are many indexes showing that Rolex is saving money by cutting costs from the tailoring of their platforms. Because we have common sizes, shapes and diameters, like the common dial diameter of the Sub with the Explorer 1, the common dial diameter between the Air-King and the Explorer 2, and a common lug width between these models despite the size differences of the cases. And then we ended up in 2022 with the Rolex Air-King prices at 14,000 euros, decreasing slowly across the year below $10,000. I guess the people figured it out. Does it feel unbalanced or at least good looking for the price asked? Well, let's find out. In 2022, the newly Air-King passed on the heavyweight category, so today the Air-King is a professional tool for pilots. The DNA has changed. Besides entering the professional line, receiving a crown guard and a safety clasp similar to the professional ones, the model received a new Rolex generation movement, the 3230, offering a higher precision, higher power reserve, resistance to shocks and magnetic fields, ensuring a depth rating of 100 meters, so a capable watch. The Fibonacci thread is a breakdown of the golden ratio, or a tool which helped for thousands of years artists and architects to create ideal and balanced compositions. The golden ratio has a mathematical formula which helps multiplying proportions, and keeping them you might create ideal shapes against other proportions. So balance can be created into a composition, whether we're talking about a piece of art, a product, or a wristwatch. As a viewer, a lover of beauty and balance, you will never have to measure something to say, yes, I love it because it's perfectly balanced. You will feel it. Our unconscious is able to determine if something is balanced. That being said, you are looking at a Submariner and you love it. It is balanced, well proportioned, understood. But when you look at something unfamiliar, it becomes questionable, which was the case with the Rolex Air-King. The dial of the Air-King is probably the most disturbing from the information point of view. We have yellow, green metallic accents, white accents, chromed numerals, printed numerals, and above all, a handwritten text on the bottom. Christmas tree on the wrist, you will say. Not quite. If a product designer would receive the brief mentioned to create a balanced dial, he would probably smoke 3 packages of cigarettes and still be incapable to use all these elements to create a balanced dial, to be worthy of the crowned brand. Luckily, the designers of Rolex inherited the dial layout from the previous iterations, and once with this launch, they managed to refine it even more, adding more practicality and balance to it. The metallic numerals were finally sculpted and engraved, being filled with lume. The brand proposing a navigation axis consisting in the lumed markers from 12, 3, 6 and 9 o'clock. Besides that, symmetry-wise, they added the 0-5 numeral, which goes along very well with the rest of the pilot-specific markers, adding more consistency to the composition. And interesting as well how the font characters are wider, to ensure the same weight as the metallic ones. They are basically the same style-wise, but the navigational ones are outlined in metal. Chromatically, the Air-King is unique because this is the sole model to host the old Rolex branding with the yellow crown and the Rolex text painted in green, which is matched tone-wise by the second hand. So what's wrong with the dial? Nothing, but more lume would have been great applied on the double numerals. The problem of the Air-King consists in the proportions chosen. Firstly, the model was geometrized. The rounded worm side facets disappeared. Now it is sharper, just like the sub and the GMT Master. The height is good, has 12mm, and the width is around 40.5mm. The feeling of wearing it in exchange is shocking. On the wrist, you will perceive it as a wide volume, which spreads on the wrist, but thin in the same time, exactly as the Rolex Explorer 2. In terms of proportions and expectations, the dial diameter has 33mm, size-wise exactly as the Rolex Explorer 2 dial. A watch that measures 42mm and wears like a 44mm. 33mm of dial is almost the size and the entire diameter of the Rolex Explorer 1, so it's wide. But then understandable, it is a pilot watch which is meant to be legible and purposeful for pilots. But not necessarily at this case scale. 40.5mm for a 33mm dial makes the watch to look big because of the wider dial, which takes control of the composition, putting the case on the second place and making it to be worn like a 42mm watch. And then the lug width was increased to 21mm like the Explorer 2 and the Submariner as well, so a pattern. The problem is that the profile of the Rolex watches becomes beefier. The bracelets are becoming more and more part of the case volume, like an integrated bracelet concept. And that is not necessarily good to obtain more weight and more metal on the wrist, because the elegance and the rhythm of volumes gets diminished, and that was the Rolex thing to ensure that perfect ratio between the oyster case and the bracelet against the wrist. Now the bracelet starts at 21mm, getting less tapered compared to the old versions. This one gets narrower to 17mm next to the clasp, which measures 19mm. The Explorer 2 starts at 21mm, tapers to 16mm with an 18mm clasp. And proportions wise, it should have been the other way around, as the volume of the Rolex Explorer 2 needed a sustained taper and beefiness for the case as they did with the 2021 version. And as a personal opinion, I would have seen the Air-King useful with crown guards, but definitely with a smaller dial, with a 20mm width between the lugs and a taper towards 15mm, like the ones from the old Submariner. I feel like 20mm with 15mm complements better the 40mm case shape. And as a conclusion to perfectly read and acknowledge the Air-King, it depends from which angle you choose to understand it. If you choose to compare it with other Rolex models, you might dislike it because of the atypical sizing specs. But if you analyze it from the function-first perspective and you see it as an aviation watch, which is meant to be legible and purposeful, in my opinion it is ideal. It is a perfect sized watch with a maximized focus on the dial and legibility. And no, I think this is not by far the worst Rolex, as it is the Rolex Datejust Wimbledon, with just a loomed marker at 9 o'clock. But what do you think about the Air-King? Is this a watch to be kept on the radar and appreciated, or just a watch to buy it to reach Pepsi bezels or Panda dials? Please let me know in the comments section. And as usual, if you're new around, please consider subscribing for future episodes. Thank you, be brave and stay safe.